I never expected that a single slow dance at a bustling wedding reception would completely upend my world, transforming a quiet, predictable chapter of my life into something entirely new. It all began innocently enough, with a simple, passing smile exchanged across a crowded, laughter-filled hall. But by the time the final notes of the song faded into the evening air, my quiet neighbor Emily leaned in so close that her words were meant for my ears alone. "Everyone saw you choose me." I let out a soft laugh, assuming she was just teasing, perhaps trying to inject some playful drama into the night. But when I turned to glance around the room, I realized with a jolt that she was dead serious. Dozens of curious eyes were already fixed squarely on us. Some of the older guests wore knowing, approving smiles, while others leaned close together, whispering behind cupped hands. In that split, terrifying second, a heavy realization dawned on me. I hadn't merely asked the woman from across the street to share a dance. Without even realizing it, I had stepped straight into a narrative that everyone else around us was already convinced had begun long before I ever woke up to it. My name is Ethan, and until that particular Saturday afternoon, Emily Carter was simply the friendly woman who lived in the house directly across the street. She was 29, worked from home as an architect, and somehow possessed a magical green thumb that kept the most vibrant garden on Maple Street thriving through every harsh season. We weren't close friends by any stretch of the imagination. We exchanged casual waves from our porches, occasionally swapped pleasantries while collecting our mail, and every now and then, she would pop over to borrow my tall aluminum ladder. Once, I had even lugged a remarkably heavy bookshelf inside her living room for her. That was the absolute extent of our relationship, or at least, that was the comforting illusion I had convinced myself of. The wedding itself belonged to my cousin Noah, who was finally marrying his college sweetheart. The celebration was held in a beautifully restored countryside barn, draped generously in twinkling fairy lights, fragrant wildflowers, and soft, ethereal white curtains that billowed gently with the cool evening breeze. I had arrived entirely on my own, perfectly content to keep to the background. Then, about 20 minutes later, Emily walked through the doors. I had no idea she was even on the guest list. In fact, she spotted me first. "Ethan?" she called out, making me turn on my heel. She was breathtaking, wearing a deep emerald green dress that caught the golden hues of the setting sun with absolute perfection. For a fleeting second, I genuinely wondered if I had stumbled into the wrong venue. "You know Noah?" I asked, completely surprised. She laughed, a bright, melodic sound. "I know the bride." Small world, as they say. As it turned out, we were seated at neighboring tables, and conversation flowed between us with an effortless ease that we had never quite managed across our dusty driveways. She shared amusing anecdotes about designing cozy, chaotic homes for young families, while I told her about the quiet, meditative satisfaction of restoring antique furniture. At one point, she confessed with a sheepish grin that she secretly dreaded weddings because relentless relatives always hounded her about when she would finally settle down. I admitted that I usually went out of my way to skip them altogether because they inevitably brought back memories of my painful last breakup. Sitting there, talking beneath the glow of the lights, we weren't just neighbors anymore. We were simply two people thoroughly enjoying each other's company, letting the hours slip away as dinner came to a close. Then, the DJ took the microphone to invite everyone onto the dance floor. I had zero intention of participating, and judging by the look on Emily's face, she felt the exact same way. Perfect, or so I foolishly thought. Suddenly, Noah bounded over and grabbed the mic. "If you're sitting down," he announced with a mischievous grin, "you're coming up here." Groans and laughter rippled through the room as people began pulling reluctant partners toward the center of the floor. Emily turned to me, her eyes sparkling. I think we're trapped. I think you're right. The first few tracks were upbeat and chaotic. People danced in wild groups, children darted between the legs of adults, and older couples clapped along enthusiastically. But eventually, the tempo shifted. The music slowed down to a rich, velvety crawl, and the crowd naturally thinned into embracing pairs. Emily glanced around nervously. "So?" she prompted. "So?" I echoed, neither of us moving an inch. Finally, letting out a soft sigh of defeat, I asked, "Would you like to dance?" She stared at me for a heartbeat longer than necessary, her expression unreadable, before a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "I thought you'd never ask." Her hand slid naturally, seamlessly into mine, and we made our way toward the center of the room. I was never much of a dancer, and I knew it. Clearing my throat, I offered a preemptive warning. "I should let you know now. I have a terrible habit of stepping on feet." "I'll take my chances," she replied smoothly. The music was soft and old-fashioned, the kind of nostalgic melody that invited quiet conversation rather than flashy dance moves. We swayed gently back and forth. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing overtly romantic, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Yet, Emily looked uncommonly pensive. "What?" I asked quietly. "Nothing." That definitely wasn't a nothing face. She just offered a quiet smile without explaining. A minute later, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a murmur. "My comments and acts. So? Everyone saw you choose me." I threw my head back and laughed. "What are you talking about? You could have asked anyone in this room. I really only know you here." She raised a single skeptical eyebrow. "You still chose me." I offered an easy shrug. It just seemed like the obvious thing to do. Her playful smile faded into something much quieter, much deeper. "Maybe to you." Before I could press her on what those words meant, the song drifted to a close, and polite applause filled the barn. The moment vanished into thin air, or so I thought. As we made our way back to our seats, Noah's grandmother intercepted us, blocking our path with a triumphant grin. "There you two are," she declared. Emily offered a polite, courteous smile. "Hello." The elderly woman's eyes practically danced. "I've been waiting years for this." Emily blinked, caught entirely off guard. "Years? I always knew you two would end up together," she said breezily. I nearly choked on the sip of water I had just taken. "We're just neighbors." She waved a dismissive hand in the air. "Emicham." "Sure," she muttered, shuffling away before either of us could formulate a proper response. Emily laughed so hard she nearly tipped her drink over onto the table. "This wedding is officially getting weird," she wheezed. "It really is." Unfortunately, the interrogation didn't stop there. Throughout the rest of the evening, a steady stream of well-meaning guests dropped subtle hints and direct questions. "When's the first date? You two look so striking together." I've never seen Ethan smile this wide. One particularly bold guest even asked how many years we had been secretly dating. I dutifully corrected every single person, repeating like a broken record, "We're just neighbors." Yet, with every repetition, the words felt hollower and less convincing than the last. When the reception finally wrapped up, we walked outside into the cool embrace of the night air, a welcome relief after hours inside the stuffy barn. Our vehicles were parked right next to each other in the gravel lot. Emily paused beside the driver's side door of her car. "I really had fun tonight," she admitted softly. "So did I." She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, anything." "I almost didn't come tonight." I frowned, caught off guard. You avoided the wedding because of me? She let out a quiet, self-deprecating chuckle. Not exactly. Then why? She looked down at the loose gravel beneath her boots, tracing a pattern with her toe. Because I've had a crush on you for nearly 2 years. The world around us seemed to instantly mute itself, the very crickets in the grass falling completely silent. I searched her face, desperately hoping she was just playing an elaborate joke. But she wasn't. She slowly nodded, meeting my gaze. I know. Crazy, right? I stood there, completely paralyzed, having had absolutely no inkling of the truth. I noticed you noticed, she added with a sad, fragile smile. You were always so polite, always smiled, always helped me out, always remembered my birthday. I know, I whispered. The quiet resignation in the way she said those 2 words absolutely shattered my heart, because she had expected nothing more than polite neighborly affection. I never wanted to make things awkward between us, she continued, her voice trembling slightly, so I kept my mouth shut. But tonight, when you asked me to dance, even if it was just for one song, I finally got to pretend. Pretend what? That maybe, just maybe, you were choosing me for real. I didn't know how to respond. Not because I didn't care, but because my chest suddenly felt impossibly, overwhelmingly full. In a sudden rush, my mind began frantically replaying every interaction we had ever shared over the years. Her showing up with a plate of fresh cookies after I recovered a brutal bout of the flu, the secret cluster of flowers she lovingly planted near my mailbox just weeks after my mother passed away, the extra cup of coffee she always seemed to magically have ready whenever our morning walks accidentally collided. Had I genuinely been that blind to all those glaring signs? Or had I simply been too afraid or too oblivious to let myself see them? I should go, she whispered, her voice tight. Before I could gather my thoughts to speak, she slipped into her car, gave me one final, heartbreakingly gentle smile, and drove away into the dark. I stood completely alone beneath the fading wedding lights long after the other guests had vanished. Sunday morning felt hollow and strange. I looked out the window across the street. Emily's curtains were tightly drawn, showing no sign of life. By lunchtime, needing a distraction, I grabbed my keys and headed out for groceries. But halfway to my truck, an elderly voice called out my name. It was Mrs. Jenkins, our 80-year-old neighbor, leaning heavily on her floral cane. Ethan, she called. Morning, Mrs. Jenkins. She offered a thoroughly wicked, knowing grin. So, I sighed, realizing the news had already traveled. You heard. The whole neighborhood heard, dear. The bride's aunt lives just 3 houses down. She leaned in closer on her cane. Don't you dare waste this opportunity. What opportunity? Some people spend their entire lives praying the right person will just live nearby. You've had her sitting right across the street the whole time. With that sage piece of advice, she shuffled away before I could offer a stammering defense. All through that afternoon, my mind kept drifting back to the smallest details. The 3 grueling hours Emily spent helping me search through the neighborhood for my runaway dog, the steaming homemade soup left quietly on my front porch when I had pneumonia, the undisguised excitement in her voice whenever our casual chats dragged on far longer than planned. Had she been quietly, steadily loving me all this time? And more importantly, why did a warm, giddy smile keep spreading across my face every time I thought about it? By Monday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I marched across the street and knocked firmly on her front door. Silence. Tuesday brought the exact same result. Wednesday rolled around, and still nothing. A gnawing panic began to sink in, whispering that she might have packed up and gone away to escape the embarrassment. Then, Thursday evening, I finally spotted her in the front yard, watering her pristine patch of roses. She froze mid-motion the moment she noticed me standing by the edge of her driveway.
He walked over slowly.
Hey, I said softly. For a long moment, neither of us knew what to say, the air heavy with unspoken weight. Finally, I broke the silence. I've been trying to catch you for days. I know. You were avoiding me. A little bit. Why? She offered a sad, fragile smile. Because rejection is so much easier to handle from a distance. My chest tightened painfully. Emily, I shouldn't have told you. I'm glad you did. She blinked, looking utterly confused. I nervously rubbed the back of my neck, suddenly feeling like an awkward teenager. She let out a surprised, breathless laugh despite herself. I've noticed you do that when you're nervous. I spent the last 4 days realizing something important. What's that? I missed you. I confessed, my voice steadying. I missed seeing you outside. I missed being able to wave across the street. I missed our accidental run-ins. Without you around, the whole neighborhood just felt wrong, completely empty. She stared at me in stunned silence, her eyes wide. I don't know the exact moment it happened, I admitted, taking a step closer. But somewhere between fixing your heavy bookshelf and holding you close on that dance floor, I stopped seeing you as just my neighbor. A single, shimmering tear rolled slowly down her cheek. I don't want us to pretend anymore, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you completely sure about this? Instead of offering a verbal answer, I simply stepped forward and held out my open hand. Would you dance with me? She looked around in disbelief. We're standing right in the middle of the street. I know. There isn't even any music playing. I know. Cars could wait. Prying neighbors could stare all they wanted. For the first time in our lives, we were right here, exactly where we needed to be, and I didn't care about anything else. Emily let out a shaky breath, slipped her hand into mine, and let me pull her close. We began to sway gently beneath the warm, amber glow of the overhead streetlights, accompanied only by the soft, rhythmic clicking of the sprinklers watering the nearby lawns. Emily laughed through a fresh wave of happy tears. They're all looking at us. I know. They're going to talk about this for weeks. I know. She rested her head lightly, trustingly against my shoulder. What on earth are we going to tell them tomorrow? I smiled, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. The truth. And what's that? I pulled back just enough to look deeply into the eyes of the woman I had unknowingly been walking toward for 2 long years. That everyone was right. She squeezed my hand tightly. About what? My smile widened, blinding and absolute. That I chose you. This time, I knew with every fiber of my being what I was doing. And if the entire neighborhood happened to witness it all over again, I couldn't possibly have been happier.